My big role has been for the last over 50 years working in parks, the last 20 mostly in the voluntary sector. A park, and especially the urban forest, as you see here, is more than just pests and gardens and whatever your favourite recreation is. In other words, we can get lost and only see the trees and not the complete forest. There's natural regeneration going here. How about just leave it and take it gently with thinning? And that's always been my approach in forest management. There is so much we don't know. What you see with the forest here is not just the trees, it's the soil underneath, and the most biggest thing is the understory. You know, as we stand here in the background, we've got a mixture of exotics and natives, and they make up the present forest. You'll probably find that when we look at the details of our wildlife, I think the Kirraroo, 40% of its menu comes from, in the urban areas at least, from exotics as well as natives. And there's something called now in ecology that's growing called evolutionary rescue, which is showing how the animals adapt to new habitats. So what I'm saying is that the issues here are complex when you look at the forest. The understories of forest is very important. You know, the largest understory across all the Maunga is grassland, and looking down here mainly straight in front of us is Kaikuyu. And there is very little knowledge coming out or discussion of how, if the intention is from the Maunga Authority to convert that to native, how do we do it? As far as I'm concerned, the present approach, as you look down here, and this admittedly this is a more of an amenity area, but here it's maintenance by glyphosate possibly. That's far from natural. You know, I've always gone on the assumption, yes, herbicides are necessary, but to get the necessary change in the management so that you don't have to rely on the pesticides or poisons to maintain that virtually much a human-centered ecological system. Now, back to the forest here. When you look at the forest, if their intention is to bring back mainly natives, the demands on each area has to be treated separately. And in some areas there may have to be large tree felling, but that needs to be discussed a lot with the community on each area. It has to be discussed how that restoration takes place. And it, from my experience, it takes decades because of the slow growth of natives. Whether you go through a succession process with shrubby species such as mahoe and manuka and the various coprosmas, or you get the forest species. These little islands of Maunga are too small to be a self-sustaining ecological system. They have to involve intensive management, even starting with herbicides you've just seen. Also, as we look across, and we can't see across, of how close the housing is, and people grow their own plants through here. Now if you go across many of the boundaries of the Maunga, many of these gardens, and it's their right, have a whole lot of plants. For instance, privet. There'll be privet and other things. So what they've got in their gardens there will come through into the Maunga. So the biggest issue for the Maunga Authority and for even park managers and rangers is to work with the neighbours so we get one integrated whole. At the moment, the way I see around Auckland, we're going through the most massive felling of our urban forest, and the Maunga will just be isolated little islands that will require, basically they'll be gardens, requiring increased finance to maintain a kind of ideological native cover. I think we're into a whole new age here with climate change, and there's big arguments going on at the moment in ecology between the neo-protectionist line and the anthropocentric ecology issues. These are not being discussed, and they need to be. The neo-protectionist is basically to say we've got to separate people from our protected areas. That means from our conservation areas, because people are dangerous, they harm it, they cause harm. Whereas the anthropocentric people say, no, we've entered a new age now, we're now the age of humans, and fair enough, we've messed up nature, but nature is recovering itself and working with ourselves as long as we take things slowly and study and be more careful. Let's start the discussion and not go holus bolus, which has been New Zealand tradition, to wreck it and then restore it. We're here in a bit of the forest. We've got some interesting things happening from my observation. I've seen that what obviously has been a deliberate trial planting under a few natives, Pūtakawa, Tautra, there's a few exotics too. Someone's done some trial. And probably this is typical of trying to get an understory and its succession going. The kind of nikau's have come away quite well. You've got some blacknums here and you've got some various sedges. But this typifies what happens, because also coming away you've got some forget-me-not, and I pick it up and it's probably, as I saw it a couple of months ago, they've been glyphosating around here, or probably something more powerful, and you've got a lot of buttercup coming up. So the succession here is, and it's the understory again that's so important, and what's in the seed bank and what's in all the surrounding areas, what's brought in by birds and things. It's the power of the new ecology, like the anthropocentric, go back to that anthropocentric age we live in. A lot of these small plants now, which are many of them are garden plants, are now part of the new ecology, and they're coming away. To try and get back, to bring back right the microfauna and flora right down to this level is an immense job, and far too idealistic, not accepting that we humans are now part of nature and there is a new nature coming forward. Fair enough, you could do a massive conversion, but not so much herbicide. It's going to demand a lot of hand weeding to take this all out. And then we've got to stay planting those smaller species down there. That's going to take an immense amount of work. I've even come across some dilemmas the other day in speaking to someone, because one of these plants down here is the nettles, the Ōwairaka species. And to save our precious red admiral butterfly. The problem is, the red admiral far more likes, because it's more aggressive, is the exotic Ōwairaka indica, which is a scheduled pest plant. So this shows how a lot of our native species are adapting to this new ecology. And this is why, with any reforestation going ahead, we need to take things slowly. There is another issue with forestry and supporting this gradual approach, in that if we take out the large trees, and eventually these big gums have to go, but what effect does that have on the trees we want to keep, such as the tautra, or it could be some of the understory coming up, and also the wind coming through, because the Maunga do get some high winds. So how's that swirling wind come down affect what will come up? So as we've found in many cases, the exotics can be used as a gradual shelter for the natives coming up. It demands more work from the tree climbing arborists to gradually fell it up, and then rather than take it away and chip it up, they can make what's called habitat piles. So these are piles of wood, and in the wood all those microorganisms and insects chewing down the wood, and those piles of wood can be used to shelter little trees coming up. Bringing back the great forest trees of koe, tarairi, wonderful bird feed. So, which could be a supplementary feed in time for the cherries. They eat the cherries, have their kind of first course there, then they come across the second course with the koe and the tarairi and the nikau. so you've enhanced the range for the bird life. That's all possible, but it does need this mixture going on and gradual approach, which will take decades, if not centuries. We sometimes misunderstand in our kind of rush to do things that it's got to happen tomorrow. But these things take time. Forests take time, and it can't happen in a decade. It takes 2 or 3 decades. The other issue is, as I've said before, if the intention is to do away with all these big exotics, therefore the birds won't come because they like to be high up in certain species. You know, for instance, the eucalypts, they do provide food. Macrocarpus, for example, are good for the ruru. And I just saying this, I can hear a kereroo flying through the air. But I do think the biggest issue is that is it intention to only have shrub species that won't grow very high, because you do need big trees for a lot of the forest birds, and just have the shrub species in certain areas, and return the maunga mainly to non-woody plants and low-level plants, as you see across many of the maunga at the moment. So they just become bare hills, which again might suit the archaeologists and the geologists to see the modified forms of these trees. But if that's the intention, I think this should be made clearer in the strategies going forward, from what I've read anyway. But to say they're going to bring back more native life by just having these shrubby species such as even mahoe and the Kānaka Mānakas sort of species and the shrubby coprosmas, I don't think will bring back much of the bird life unless we get those forest trees going, which will take many decades, if not a century or so, to get to their full glory. Another interesting thing that we've got to consider in any of urban forests is the whole area of pests and diseases. You know, 50% of the life that exists are generally parasites or pests on other species. So if you make one species extinct, you're making another whole realm of species extinct. And it's another question of there's issues we don't know. So I think we again take things slowly. But these new diseases coming forward are factors that have to be considered in the management, and also how much we alter a urban forest. Because if you alter this, you're making tremendous changes and you're only opening up for more disease to come in and more pests and so forth. I've been asked what's the general health and well-being of this urban forest here on Ōwairaka. And all I can say, it's a mixture of things that's happened and being neglected over many years. It all started with some sort of vision with the planting of a mixture of natives and exotics. It's been left with some regeneration. When the grazing came in with cattle for many decades, that's had an enormous impact on the fertility of the soil and everything. Cattle taken off, now you're getting this regeneration of various things. So those visions decades ago, you had some managers who made certain decisions. All I know that in the end, nature will always win. But if we go ahead under unknowing certain things or ignorance of nature itself, and there's so much we don't know. We don't know much about our insect life, microfauna and flora. We know damn all. Even and we look at viruses with our own species, trying to fight viruses. What about all the viruses through here that will have an influence on these species? But all I know is if you disturb a system, you're opening it up for more damage. So let's go slowly, carefully, and consult.